Module 3. Growing Beyond the Colonies. Alexander Hamilton. Though Alexander Hamilton created much of the philosophy upon which the country was built, having authored most of the Federalist Papers, many Americans opposed Hamilton's blueprint for national prosperity. Hamilton's economic policies, which included the establishment of a national bank and the assumption of state debts by the federal government, were seen by some as favoring the interests of the wealthy at the expense of ordinary citizens. The national bank, in particular, was viewed as a tool for consolidating financial power in the hands of a few elites. Additionally, Hamilton's support for protective tariffs and subsidies for domestic manufacturers was seen as promoting industrialization at the expense of farmers and rural interests. Finally, some critics saw Hamilton's vision of a strong central government as a threat to individual liberty and state sovereignty. Foreign affairs and their impact on domestic politics. Foreign affairs had a significant impact on domestic politics in the United States during the 1790s. Two major events in particular, the French Revolution and tensions with Great Britain, had significant effects on American politics. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, initially enjoyed broad support among Americans who saw it as a continuation of the ideals of the American Revolution. However, as the revolution became more radical and violent, support for it began to wane. Many Americans were disturbed by the Reign of Terror and the execution of King Louis XVI, and they began to fear that revolutionary ideals could lead to anarchy and chaos. This led to a divide in American politics, with Federalists too generally opposing the revolution and Democratic Republicans supporting it. Tensions with Great Britain also had an impact on domestic politics. In the aftermath of the Revolutionary War, relations between the two nations remained strained, and there were ongoing disputes over issues such as trade, territory, and the treatment of American sailors. These tensions led to the quasi-war with France and increased calls for a stronger navy to protect American interest. HIS. This debate over foreign policy also became intertwined with domestic politics, with Federalists generally supporting a stronger navy and a more aggressive approach to foreign policy, while Democratic Republicans favored a more cautious and isolationist stance. Some Federalists were willing to sacrifice political freedom for party advantage because they believed that their party's policies were necessary for the stability and prosperity of the nation, although during elections in the 1800s, they were deeply divided. The Federalist Party was founded on the principle of a strong central government and a broad interpretation of the Constitution, which gave the federal government expansive powers. Federalists believed that this approach was necessary to promote economic growth, protect American interests abroad, and ensure the survival of the young nation. However, these policies were often controversial and faced significant opposition from Democratic Republicans, who favored a more limited role for the federal government and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. In order to advance their policies and maintain their hold on power, some Federalists were willing to curtail political freedom and engage in tactics such as suppressing free speech and restricting the right to vote. People at the time felt so strongly about their political beliefs that Samuel Adams, and other revolutionaries, saw republicanism as a way of life. For example, during the Adams administration, the Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it illegal to criticize the government and limited the rights of immigrants. These acts were widely criticized as an attack on free speech and individual liberty, but some Federalists defended them as necessary measures to protect the nation's security. In the decade following the American Revolution, the United States faced a number of threats to its security both at home and abroad. The new nation responded to these threats in a variety of ways, including diplomatic negotiations, military action, and the development of a national defense infrastructure. One of the key threats to American security during this period was piracy in the Mediterranean. In response, the United States negotiated treaties with several North African states and established the U.S. Navy to protect American shipping. Another major threat came from conflicts with Native American tribes on the western frontier. The United States responded with military campaigns against Native American forces, such as General Anthony Wayne's campaign against the Northwest Confederacy. At the same time, tensions with European powers such as Great Britain and France also threatened American security. The United States responded with diplomatic negotiations and military preparedness. For example, President George Washington signed the Jay Treaty with Great Britain in 1794 to resolve outstanding issues from the Revolutionary War, and the United States began building up its navy to protect American interests abroad. The growth of the market economy. The growth of the United States as a republic in the 19th century had a profound impact on the development of the market economy and relations with Native Americans. As the country expanded westward, it opened up new markets and resources for economic growth. The government promoted policies such as westward expansion, infrastructure development, and the protection of property rights that encouraged the growth of a capitalist market economy. This led to the emergence of industries such as agriculture, mining, and manufacturing, and the rise of large corporations. At the same time, the growth of the market economy had a significant impact on relations with Native Americans. As settlers moved west, they often came into conflict with Native American tribes over land and resources. The government's policy of Indian removal, which began with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forced Native Americans off their ancestral lands and onto reservations. This policy was driven in part by the desire to open up new lands for settlement and economic development. The growth of the market economy also had a significant impact on Native American communities. The introduction of trade goods and the market economy disrupted traditional Native American economic practices and led to increased dependency on the cash economy. This dependency, coupled with government policies such as assimilation and forced education, led to the erosion of traditional Native American cultures and ways of life. Military conflicts. The United States found it difficult to avoid military conflict during this period because it was facing several complex and competing challenges both at home and abroad. These challenges too included conflicts with Native American tribes on the western frontier, tensions with European powers over issues such as trade and territorial claims, and ongoing debates over the role of the federal government and individual states in domestic and foreign affairs. Additionally, the growth of the market economy and the expansion of American influence around the world created new opportunities and challenges that required military intervention or diplomacy to resolve. The War of 1812 is sometimes referred to as a Second War of Independence because it marked a significant turning point in the relationship between the United States and Great Britain and helped to establish the United States as a major world power. At the time, many Americans believed that the United States had not received proper respect from Great Britain and that the British were still treating the country as a colony. The War of 1812 was seen as a way to assert American independence and defend American sovereignty against British aggression. The war was also significant because it helped to establish the United States as a major world power. Despite facing significant military challenges early on in the conflict, the United States was ultimately able to repel British forces and hold its own on the global stage. The successful defense of the United States against a major European power helped to boost American morale and establish the country's reputation as a force to be reckoned with. The government also had multiple slave revolts at this time. An example of this was the Nat Turner Insurrection of 1831, which was the bloodiest, most brutal slave revolt, and David Walker, who appealed for colored citizens of the world for a black revolt against white tyranny. Acquiring land. In the 19th century, U.S. policymakers acquired land for settlement from foreign governments and Indian nations through a variety of means, including treaties, negotiations, and military force. President Thomas Jefferson needed full cooperation from the congressional Republican to accomplish his goals of acquiring land. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 from France was one of the largest land acquisitions in U.S. history, doubling the size of the country. President Thomas Jefferson negotiated the purchase for $15 million, which gave the U.S. control over the Mississippi River and access to the port of New Orleans. President Thomas Jefferson bought the land from France for very little because France had heard of Canada's reputation as a cold and inhospitable land, which acted as the greatest deterrent of the French dream of a vast American empire. In the decades that followed, the U.S. continued to acquire land from foreign governments through treaties and negotiations. The Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, for example, ceded Florida from Spain to the U.S. in exchange for American claims to Texas. The Oregon Treaty of 1846 settled a dispute between the U.S. and Great Britain over the Oregon Territory, with the U.S. acquiring present-day Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. The U.S. also acquired land from Native American nations through a combination of negotiations, coercion, and military force. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, for example, forced thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States to Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River. This policy was driven in part by the desire to open up new lands for settlement and economic development. In some cases, U.S. policymakers negotiated treaties with Native American nations in which they agreed to cede land in exchange for other benefits, such as money, food, and supplies. However, these treaties were often coerced or fraudulent, and many Native American nations refused to recognize them. Transportation. Developments in transportation in the 19th century played a critical role in supporting the growth of agriculture and manufacturing in the United States. Prior to the 19th century, transportation was limited to slow and expensive methods such as horse-drawn wagons and boats. However, the growth of canals, railroads, and steamships changed this dramatically. The construction of canals, such as the Erie Canal, connected the Great Lakes region with the Atlantic coast, allowing for goods to be transported quickly and cheaply. Farmers could now transport their crops to markets more efficiently, which helped to spur the growth of agriculture. The advent of railroads had an even greater impact on transportation. Railroads allowed for goods to be transported even faster and further than ever before. Manufacturers could now ship goods across the country quickly and cheaply, which helped to spur the growth of manufacturing. The railroads also made it possible for people to travel more easily, which helped to spur economic growth and settlement in new areas. Finally, the development of steamships helped to connect the United States with markets overseas. Steamships could travel further and faster than traditional sailing ships, which helped to open up new markets for American goods and expand the country's economic reach.